The champagne flute shattered against the wall, sending crystal shards scattering across our dining room. I stood frozen, staring at the woman who'd just announced herself as my husband's girlfriend of 3 years. She'd walked into our 10th anniversary dinner uninvited, designer purse swinging from her arm, and demanded half of my company, the business I'd built from nothing while James was supposedly working late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now, I understood exactly what kind of work had kept him busy all those nights. The look on his face told me everything. He'd promised her something that wasn't his to give. "Tell her, James," Tiffany insisted, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at me accusingly. "Tell her about our agreement. 10 years of marriage, and I didn't recognize the man sitting across from me. But then again, maybe I never really knew him at all." I met James Anderson during my final year of business school. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely supportive of my dreams to start my own home decor company. We married within a year, settling into a modest starter home in Portland where I converted our garage into a workshop for crafting handmade candles, throw pillows, and table centerpieces. "You're so talented, Sarah," James would say, kissing my forehead as I worked late into the night filling my first small batch of orders. "Just don't get too caught up in all this. We'll need to think about starting a family soon." I nodded absently, focused on perfecting the scent combination for my signature lavender sage candles. The craft fairs and weekend markets were bringing steady business, but I knew I needed a more sustainable model if Evergreen Home Essentials was going to be more than a hobby. "I've been thinking about approaching that new boutique on Hawthorne," I told James over dinner one night. "They feature local artisans, and their customer base is exactly who I'm trying to reach." James swirled his wine thoughtfully. "That sounds nice, honey. But is it worth the effort? My promotion is coming up next month. We'll be comfortable without you needing to work so hard." Something in his tone bothered me, but I brushed it aside. "This isn't about the money, James. I want to build something of my own." The boutique took my products on consignment, and when they sold out within 2 weeks, the owner called to place a larger order. I was ecstatic. James was conspicuously quiet. "Don't you think it's getting to be a bit much?" he asked that evening, as I calculated how many hours I'd need to fulfill the new order. "The house is constantly smelling like essential oils, and you're distracted all the time." "It's just until I can afford to rent a proper workspace," I assured him. "This could really be something, James," he sighed heavily. "I've got that business trip to Chicago next week. I was hoping we could focus on us before I leave." I promised to make time, but my mind was already spinning with possibilities. If the boutique continued to sell well, maybe I could approach other local stores, perhaps even create a small wholesale catalog. The day before James left for his trip, I received a call that would change everything. "Mrs. Anderson? This is Diana Morris from First Portland Bank. I'm calling about the second mortgage on your home." My blood ran cold. "There must be some mistake? We don't have a second mortgage." The silence on the other end was brief but telling. "According to our records, your husband initiated a home equity line of credit 3 months ago. The paperwork has both signatures, but if you're saying you weren't aware..." I felt like I was drowning. "How much?" $85,000, Mrs. Anderson. The funds were withdrawn 2 days after approval." When I confronted James that evening, his explanation came too quickly, too smoothly. "It's for investments, Sarah. I was going to surprise you once they matured. We're talking potentially doubling our money in a year." "What investments exactly?" I demanded. "Tech stocks, mostly. Some promising startups." He pulled me close. "Trust me, it's going to set us up for the future we've always wanted." I wanted to believe him. Maybe I even did, a little. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. While James showered the next morning, I checked his laptop. Something I'd never done before. The password was my birthday, and what I found made my stomach turn. There were no investment accounts. Instead, I found emails confirming the purchase of a sports car registered to an address I didn't recognize, dinner reservations at restaurants we'd never visited together, and hotel bookings in cities where James had supposedly gone for team-building retreats. And then I found the photos. James with a woman I'd never seen before, young, blonde, laughing as they lounged on a boat, her hand possessively on his chest. The date stamp was from last summer, when James had told me he was at a conference in San Diego. When he emerged from the shower, I was sitting on the bed, the laptop open beside me. "Who is she?" I asked quietly. His face drained of color before shifting quickly to anger. "You went through my computer. What happened to privacy and trust?" "You took out a second mortgage on our home without telling me," I shot back. "What happened to honesty and respect?" The argument that followed was ugly. James deflected, minimized, and finally admitted to a mistake that meant nothing. He swore it was over and begged for another chance. "I'll cancel the Chicago trip," he offered. "We'll spend the time reconnecting." Emotionally exhausted, I agreed to try. I needed time to think, to figure out what this meant for our marriage. For my future. The next day, I was distributing flyers for Evergreen Home Essentials at a local farmer's market when I literally bumped into Harold Wilson, causing him to spill coffee down his expensive-looking jacket. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, frantically offering napkins. Instead of being angry, the distinguished older man chuckled. "No harm done. Gives me an excuse to buy a new one." He glanced at the flyer in my hand. "Evergreen Home Essentials? Are those your products I've been seeing at Willow Boutique?" Surprised, I nodded. "You've seen my work?" "My daughter bought your eucalyptus wreaths for her entire office last week. Wouldn't stop talking about the quality." He extended his hand. "Harold Wilson. I used to run distribution for Pacific Northwest Furnishings before I retired." We ended up talking for nearly an hour. Harold was genuinely interested in my business, asking insightful questions about my production capacity, pricing strategy, and growth plans. "You've got something special here," he said finally, "but you're thinking too small. Boutiques are fine for now, but the real money is in wholesale to larger retailers." I sighed. "I'd love to scale up, but I'm working out of my garage. I don't have the capital for manufacturing space." Harold considered me thoughtfully. "I might have a solution if you're open to some mentoring." That conversation should have been the highlight of my week. Instead, it was overshadowed by the discovery I made when I returned home early from the market, hoping to surprise James with lunch before his postponed trip. His car wasn't in the driveway, but the house wasn't empty. A woman's purse sat on our entryway table, expensive, with a designer logo I recognized from magazines. Music played softly from our bedroom upstairs. I stood in the living room, suddenly understanding with perfect clarity. The Chicago trip hadn't been canceled. It had merely relocated to our home, on a day James thought I'd be gone for hours. I didn't confront them immediately. Something cold and calculating had taken over. I quietly took photos of her belongings in our house, then left exactly as I had come. In my car, I called Harold Wilson with shaking hands. "That mentoring offer," I said when he answered. "I'd like to take you up on it, as soon as possible." "Of course," he replied, sounding concerned at the tone of my voice. "Are you all right, Sarah?" "No," I said honestly. "But I think I will be." I drove to my best friend Megan's apartment and finally let myself break down. Between sobs, I told her everything. The second mortgage, the affair, finding them in our home. "What are you going to do?" she asked after I'd exhausted my tears. I took a deep breath. "I'm going to build my company. I'm going to make it so successful that when I finally leave him, it will hurt him more than it hurts me." Megan's eyes widened. "You're not leaving him now?" I shook my head slowly. Not yet. I need time to secure my future, and I need to make sure he doesn't get a single piece of what I build from here on out. The next day, I consulted with Diana Morris, who turned out to be not just a bank officer, but also an attorney specializing in business law. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She listened carefully to my situation. If you start taking protective measures now, we can ensure your business remains solely yours, regardless of what happens with your marriage, she advised. But you need to be strategic about timing and documentation. I drove home with a clear plan forming. James was waiting anxiously, having called and texted repeatedly since the day before. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I've been worried sick." I looked at him. This man I had loved and trusted, and made the hardest decision of my life. I would stay, for now. I would pretend to forgive, and I would use the time to build something he could never take away from me. I needed space to think, I said simply, but I'm ready to work on us now. The relief on his face was palpable. He didn't know that while he'd been destroying our marriage, he had inadvertently set me on the path to independence. That night, as James slept beside me, I opened my laptop and wrote the first draft of my business plan. Evergreen Home Essentials was about to grow beyond anything he could imagine, and I had found partners who would help me protect it from the man who had just mortgaged our future for a woman he'd hidden from me for who knew how long. Harold Wilson's solution turned out to be a recently vacated warehouse space owned by his brother-in-law. It needed work, but the rent was reasonable, and it offered 10 times the production capacity of my garage workshop. "It's not charity," Harold insisted when I expressed concern about the favorable terms. "It's good business. You'll make it worth his while with the quality product you're putting out." While James believed I was simply expanding my little hobby, I was working 14-hour days transforming the space into a proper manufacturing facility. Harold introduced me to contacts in the industry, suppliers who could provide materials at wholesale prices, small batch manufacturers who could help scale production while maintaining quality, and most importantly, potential buyers for larger orders. "You need to protect yourself legally," Harold advised during one of our mentor sessions, "especially given your personal situation." I had told Harold only the basics, that my marriage was troubled and that I needed to establish financial independence. He didn't need the details to understand the stakes. On his recommendation, I met with Diana Morris again, this time in her capacity as an attorney. "We need to establish your business as a separate entity from your marital assets," Diana explained. "Since Washington is a community property state, anything you build during the marriage could potentially be considered joint property in a divorce." "How do I prevent that?" I asked. "We'll create an LLC with careful documentation showing that this business is being built with your separate property," she said. "I'm also going to suggest a post-nuptial agreement." I frowned. James would never agree to that. Diana smiled shrewdly. "He might, if it's presented correctly. Men like your husband often respond to incentives." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would approach James about formalizing the separation between his investments and my business. The agreement would protect his separate activities from being considered marital assets, something he would want, given what I now knew about his spending. In exchange, my business would remain solely mine. When I presented the idea, framed as protection for his financial ventures, James didn't hesitate. "That actually makes a lot of sense," he said, scanning the document Diana had prepared. "This way my investments stay mine, and your crafting business stays yours." He didn't bother reading the fine print, which specified that any growth or profits from my crafting business would remain my separate property as well. He certainly didn't notice the clause protecting my future intellectual property rights. "Don't you need to read it more carefully?" I asked, almost wanting him to catch on. James chuckled. I trust you, babe. Besides, it's not like your candle business is going to turn into some empire. I signed first, hand steady despite my racing heart. James signed second, initializing each page without reading it. Diana notarized the document, her expression professionally neutral. Congratulations, she said as she stamped the final page. You're now legally protected. James assumed she was talking to both of us. I knew better. With legal protection in place, I threw myself into growing Evergreen. I hired 2 part-time employees to help with production and developed a consistent brand identity with the help of a graphic designer Megan introduced me to. The woodland-inspired packaging and earth-toned color scheme became instantly recognizable. Our first big break came when a popular lifestyle blogger featured our winter collection in her holiday gift guide. Orders flooded in faster than we could fulfill them. I had to quickly hire 3 more people and implement proper inventory management systems. James remained oblivious to the scale of what was happening. When I came home late, exhausted but exhilarated from overseeing a large shipment, he barely looked up from his phone. Good day playing shopkeeper? He asked absently. I didn't correct him. In fact, I began to deliberately downplay the business around him, talking about craft sales instead of wholesale accounts, helping out at the workshop instead of managing a growing team. Meanwhile, I was making connections at trade shows across the West Coast. At a home goods exhibition in Seattle, I met a buyer from a regional chain of high-end department stores who placed an order large enough to necessitate another expansion. You should be proud, Harold told me as we toured a larger manufacturing space 6 months after opening the warehouse. Most new businesses take years to reach this level. I smiled tightly. I had good motivation. My double life was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. At home, I pretended to be the same Sarah who had once been content with local craft fairs. In the world of Evergreen, I was becoming known as a tough but fair businesswoman with exacting standards and innovative products. The strain showed in unexpected ways. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and found myself pulling away from the few friends who weren't connected to the business. Only Megan knew both sides of my life, and her concern was growing. This can't be sustainable, she said one evening when I canceled dinner plans to deal with a shipping issue. Either the business will suffer, or you will. It's temporary, I insisted, just until I'm ready. But how would I know when that moment arrived? I had set out to build security, but somewhere along the way, Evergreen had become more than an escape plan. It was becoming my passion, my purpose. The decision was made for me on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. I was reviewing sample layouts for our first product catalog when my phone rang. It was James. Hey, I need to access some funds from our joint account for an investment opportunity, but it's showing insufficient funds. Did you make a large withdrawal? My blood turned to ice. I had indeed transferred money to cover an unexpected tax bill for Evergreen, but I'd been careful to only use what I considered my portion of our joint funds. Just what I needed for some business expenses, I said carefully. How much are you short? His laugh held an edge. About 30 grand. Since when does your little hobby need that kind of cash? It's not a hobby anymore, James. It's a real business with real expenses. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, I'm coming to see this real business of yours. Text me the address. I had never invited James to the manufacturing facility. He had never asked to see it. Now I had no choice but to give him the address and prepare for the confrontation that had been brewing for months. Harold was at the facility when James arrived, thankfully. My husband's expression as he took in the scale of the operation, the production lines, the staff, the inventory ready for shipment, shifted from skepticism to shock to something darker. What is all this? He demanded, gesturing broadly at the bustling workspace. This is Evergreen Home Essentials, I replied, simply. My company. Harold stepped forward, extending his hand. Harold Wilson, business advisor to Evergreen. You must be the husband I've heard so little about. James ignored the offered hand, his attention fixed on me. You've been hiding this from me? Your own husband? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Like you hid Tiffany from me? Or the sports? Car? Or the second mortgage? Harold's eyebrows shot up, but he remained silent, a steady presence at my side. That's different, James sputtered. This is significant. This changes our financial picture completely. A calculating look replaced his anger. Do you realize what we could do with this kind of income? The investments we could make? And there it was, the confirmation that he saw my success only in terms of how it could benefit him. Not pride in what I had built, not regret for underestimating me, just immediate calculation of how to exploit this new resource. There is no we when it comes to Evergreen, I said firmly. The business is mine, solely mine, legally protected as separate property. He frowned. That's not how marriage works. What's yours is mine. Not according to the post-nuptial agreement you signed, I countered. You know, the one that protected your investments? The realization dawned slowly on his face. You tricked me. Harold cleared his throat. I think I'll give you two some privacy. He squeezed my shoulder supportively before walking away. Alone with James, I felt a strange calm descend. I didn't trick you. I protected myself, just like you've been protecting yourself all along. By hiding a whole company from me? His voice rose, drawing glances from nearby employees. By building a future that you can't mortgage away for your girlfriend? I replied evenly. I know about Tiffany, James. I've known for months. The car, the trips, the hotels, all paid for with our home equity. His face paled. It's not what you think. It doesn't matter what I think anymore. What matters is what I know. I gestured around us. And what I've built despite you, not because of you. James's expression hardened. We'll see what my lawyer has to say about this. I nodded calmly. Yes, we will. But first, I suggest you read the agreement you signed. Diana was very thorough. As he stormed out, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The pretense was over. Whatever came next, divorce, legal battles, more lies, I would face it as the woman I had become, not the woman who had once believed in James Anderson's promises. Harold returned, concern evident in his weathered face. Are you all right? I think I will be, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. For the first time in a long time, I think I really will be. The weeks following James's discovery of Evergreen were a strange mix of professional triumph and personal unraveling. We continued living in the same house, but as virtual strangers. James alternated between cold silence and calculated charm, still believing he could somehow gain access to the business I'd built. I was thinking, he said casually over a rare shared dinner, with my business contacts and your product line, we could really take Evergreen to the next level. Have you considered corporate gifting programs? I smiled thinly. Harold and I implemented those 3 months ago. We're already supplying customized packages to 4 major companies in Portland. James's jaw tightened. Harold again. Don't you think you're relying a bit too heavily on an old man's outdated business sense? Harold's connections and experience have been invaluable, I replied. Unlike yours. It was a direct hit, and James knew it. He pushed away from the table. I have a late meeting. With Tiffany? I asked quietly. He didn't answer, just grabbed his keys and left. I didn't mind. These evenings alone had become precious time for planning Evergreen's next phase of growth. Diana had warned me that James would likely challenge the post-nuptial agreement. Men, like him, don't lose gracefully, she said during one of our regular check-ins. Be prepared for him to get creative, and potentially vindictive. Her prediction proved accurate. First came the financial pressure. James stopped contributing to our joint accounts, leaving me to cover all household expenses. He assumed this would force me to dip into Evergreen's funds, potentially muddying the waters between personal and business finances. Instead, I opened a separate personal account and rerouted my modest but growing salary from Evergreen there. I continued paying the mortgage and utilities from our joint account until those funds were depleted, then seamlessly switched to my new account. When that tactic failed, James tried a more direct approach. "I've been thinking about our situation," he said one morning, his tone conciliatory. "I may have overreacted about Evergreen. I'm proud of what you've built, Sarah." I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing applications for a new marketing position. "Are you?" "Of course," he insisted, pouring himself coffee. "And I want to support you. In fact, I'd like to invest in Evergreen's expansion. Properly, with paperwork and everything." I almost laughed at the transparency of his ploy. "That's not necessary. We secured Series A funding last week, $5 million in exchange for 15% equity. The investors specifically value our women-owned status." The coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. $5 million? 15%? He set the cup down carefully. "That would value the company at just over $33 million, I confirmed. "The valuation was based on our growth projections and intellectual property portfolio." His face went through a series of calculations. I could practically see him multiplying the community property laws by 33 million and dividing by 2. "Sarah," he said, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he used when trying to be persuasive, "we need to talk about us, about our future together." And there it was, his new strategy. If he couldn't break the legal protections around Evergreen, he would try to salvage the marriage long enough to position himself for a better settlement if we divorced. "I think it's a little late for that conversation," I said, closing my laptop. "Don't you have somewhere to be? Someone to see?" His expression hardened. "You don't know everything you think you know." "I know enough," I replied, gathering my things. "And so does Diana." That evening, I drove to Harold's house in the West Hills for our weekly strategy dinner. These meetings had evolved from formal business discussions to something more personal, a surrogate father offering wisdom to the daughter he never had. Harold's modernist home overlooked the city, its walls of glass framing Portland's twinkling lights like a living painting. His housekeeper, Elena, greeted me warmly and led me to the back patio where Harold was nursing his customary single malt scotch. "There she is," he said, rising to embrace me. "The woman of the hour. I heard about the funding round. Congratulations. Are in order." I relaxed for the first time that day. It still doesn't feel real sometimes. "It's real," he assured me, guiding me to a chair. "And it's just the beginning. Now, tell me what's happening on the home front." I recounted my interaction with James that morning, including his transparent attempt to rekindle our relationship. Harold's expression darkened. "He's getting desperate. That makes him dangerous." "Diana says the postnuptial will hold," I assured him. "It's not just about the legal protections," Harold said, swirling his scotch thoughtfully. "Men with wounded pride can lash out in unpredictable ways. You need to be prepared for him to fight dirty." I sighed, suddenly exhausted by the constant vigilance. "Sometimes I wonder if I should just offer him a settlement and be done with it." Harold shook his head firmly. "That would be a mistake. He didn't earn it, Sarah. He doesn't deserve a reward for betrayal." Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Harold was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the city below. "My wife left me 30 years ago," he finally said, "for my business partner. They'd been having an affair for years, right under my nose." "I'm so sorry," I said softly. He waved away my sympathy. The worst part wasn't the affair. It was that I gave her half of everything in the divorce, half of what I'd spent my life building, just to avoid a fight. His eyes met mine, intense, with remembered pain. She and Jeffrey used that money to start a competing business. They nearly destroyed everything I had left. I understood then why Harold had taken such an interest in my situation, why he'd been so insistent on legal protections from the beginning. "What happened?" I asked. A small, satisfied smile crossed his face. "I rebuilt. Better and stronger than before. I learned from my mistakes and made sure they couldn't touch the new business I created." He leaned forward. "That's what I see in you, Sarah. The same resilience, the same determination not to be defined by someone else's betrayal." The connection between us deepened that night. Harold wasn't just a mentor anymore. He was a fellow survivor showing me a path forward that I couldn't yet see clearly for myself. As spring turned to summer, Evergreen continued its expansion. We added a line of eco-friendly cleaning products that quickly gained traction with our environmentally conscious customer base. A feature in a national lifestyle magazine brought attention from larger retailers, and I found myself traveling frequently for meetings and trade shows. James and I settled into an uneasy coexistence. He came and went at odd hours, and I immersed myself in work, avoiding the hollow shell our home had become. Divorce seemed inevitable, but neither of us made the first move, locked in a cold war of calculated patience. The catalyst came on a sweltering July afternoon. I'd returned home unexpectedly after a meeting was canceled, hoping to work in the air-conditioned comfort of our house rather than the warehouse, which still lacked proper cooling. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street, the sports car James had bought with our home equity. This time, I didn't retreat. I walked directly into the house, following the sound of voices to the kitchen. James and Tiffany sat at our breakfast bar, documents spread between them, heads close together in consultation. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, setting down my bag with deliberate calm. They jumped apart like guilty teenagers. Tiffany recovered first, her crimson lips curving into an insincere smile. "Sarah, James didn't mention you'd be home early." "Clearly," I replied, my eyes fixed on the papers they'd been reviewing. From my angle, I could see Evergreen's name on several pages. James hurriedly gathered the documents. "We were just going over some investment opportunities." "Involving my company?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Tiffany's smile faltered. James shot her a warning look before turning to me with practiced sincerity. "Not exactly. Tiffany works in marketing, and I was showing her some of Evergreen's materials. Getting a professional opinion." I looked at the woman who had been sleeping with my husband for who knew how long. Young, confident, expensively dressed in a way that telegraphed ambition rather than taste. "And what is your professional opinion?" I asked her directly. She glanced at James before answering. "Your branding is solid, but conservative. There's room to be more aggressive in your market positioning." I nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. And is sleep with the founder's husband a standard marketing tactic these days, or is that your personal innovation?" James stood abruptly. "That's enough, Sarah." "No, I don't think it is," I countered, a strange calm settling over me. "I think we're just getting to the interesting part, like why you're showing Evergreen's proprietary materials to someone with no official connection to the company." "She's not just someone," James snapped. "Tiffany has been instrumental in developing—" He stopped, realizing too late what he was revealing. "Developing what exactly?" I pressed. Tiffany stood, gathering her designer purse. "I should go." "Stay," I said. "I'm curious about what you two have been developing that involves my company." James's expression hardened. "Fine. Tiffany and I have been working on a business plan for Woodland Essentials, a premium home goods brand that will cater to a younger demographic than Evergreen." The pieces clicked into place with nauseating clarity. "You're planning to compete with me? Using my own business model?" It's not the same, Tiffany interjected. We're targeting millennials with more contemporary designs and sustainable messaging. My designs, my sustainable messaging, I said flatly. Just repackaged. For a different age group. James shrugged. Business ideas aren't exclusive, Sarah. There's room in the market for multiple players. I looked at them both, the husband who had betrayed me and the woman who had helped him do it, now conspiring to undermine the one thing I had built for myself. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. This is my house too, James protested. Not for long, I replied. Diana will be contacting you tomorrow to begin divorce proceedings. I suggest you find somewhere else to stay tonight. After they left, I called Diana immediately, explaining what I'd discovered. She wasn't surprised. We anticipated something like this, she reminded me. That's why we registered all your intellectual property and had employees sign non-competes. If they try to launch a copycat business, we'll bury them in litigation. Next, I called Harold, who listened to my account with growing anger. Come to the cabin, he said when I finished. You shouldn't be alone right now, and we need to plan our next moves carefully. Harold's cabin was a misnomer. The cabin was actually a substantial lodge on Mount Hood, a retreat where he did his best thinking. I packed quickly, knowing James would likely return once Tiffany calmed him down. As I drove into the mountains, anxiety gave way to a strange sense of liberation. The pretense was finally over. The divorce would be messy, the competition with Woodland Essentials potentially damaging, but at least I was no longer living a double life. Harold was waiting on the porch when I arrived, 2 glasses of wine already poured. You look better than I expected, he observed as I got out of the car. I feel better, I admitted, like I can finally breathe. We stayed up late that night, not just planning legal strategies against James and Tiffany's venture, but mapping out Evergreen's future, expansion into new product categories, possible retail locations of our own, international distribution. They've done you a favor, Harold said as our planning session wound down. They've freed you from the last constraints holding you back. I realized he was right. For months, I'd been building Evergreen while still trying to maintain the fiction of my marriage, dividing my energy between growth and self-protection. Now, I could focus entirely on moving forward. To new beginnings, Harold said, raising his glass. To new beginnings, I echoed, feeling for the first time that the phrase might actually be true. The divorce proceedings were as contentious as Diana had predicted. James challenged the post-nuptial agreement, claiming he hadn't understood its implications and that I had deliberately misled him about Evergreen's potential. His lawyer, an aggressive man with slicked-back hair and a reputation for scorched-earth tactics, filed motion after motion trying to pierce the legal protections around my company. Meanwhile, Tiffany and James moved quickly to launch Woodland Essentials, securing a small manufacturing space and rushing products to market that bore uncomfortable similarities to Evergreen's early offerings. They hadn't copied our designs exactly, they weren't that careless, but the inspiration was unmistakable. They're counting on confusion in the marketplace, Diana explained during one of our strategy sessions. Customers who think they're buying your products when they're actually getting their knockoffs. We responded with a 3-pronged approach: a cease and desist letter addressing the most egregious similarities, a targeted PR campaign highlighting Evergreen's commitment to authentic woman-owned craftsmanship, and expedited development of our premium line to further differentiate our brand positioning. The legal battles consumed enormous amounts of time and emotional energy. There were days when I questioned whether the fight was worth it, whether I should just settle with James to be free of the constant conflict. Harold remained my steadfast ally during this period, his own experience with betrayal and rebuilding providing perspective I desperately needed. This is the hardest part, he assured me during a particularly difficult week when sales had temporarily dipped following confusion caused by Woodland's launch. But it won't last forever. He was right. By fall, Evergreen had weathered the initial impact of Woodland's entry into the market. Our established relationships with retailers held firm, and our customers largely remained loyal. James and Tiffany's venture struggled to gain traction without the years of groundwork I had put into building Evergreen's reputation and supply chain. What should have been a moment of vindication was complicated by an unexpected development. One evening in late September, I was working late at the manufacturing facility when I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Is this Sarah Anderson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. Who's calling?" "This is Portland Memorial Hospital. We have a Harold Wilson here. You're listed as his emergency contact." My blood ran cold. What happened? Mr. Wilson experienced cardiac symptoms while dining at Riverview Restaurant. He's stable now, but he's asking for you. I drove to the hospital in a daze, barely registering the rain-slicked streets or the distant rumble of thunder. Harold had become such a constant in my life, mentor, friend, surrogate father, that the thought of losing him was unbearable. He looked smaller somehow in the hospital bed, monitors beeping softly beside him. When he saw me, he managed a weak smile. "Sorry about dinner," he said. "Damn salmon was overcooked anyway." I tried to match his lightness. "You could have just sent it back instead of creating all this drama." His chuckle turned into a wince. The cardiologist had explained to me in the hallway that Harold had experienced a moderate heart attack. Tests revealed significant blockage that would require bypass surgery as soon as he was stable enough. "They want to operate," he told me, his voice more serious. "Triple bypass." I took his hand. "When?" "Day after tomorrow, if all the tests look good." He squeezed my fingers. "I need you to do something for me, Sarah." "Anything," I promised. "There's a file in my home office, top drawer of the desk, labeled Contingencies. I need you to get it and bring it here tomorrow." His eyes held mine. "And I need you to promise me something else." "What?" "If something goes wrong in that operating room, I need you to keep fighting. Don't let what happened to me happen to you." I shook my head. "Nothing's going to go wrong." "Promise me," he insisted. "No settlements, no half measures. What's yours is yours." Tears stung my eyes. "I promise." The file Harold asked me to retrieve contained documents that took my breath away. A revised will naming me as his primary beneficiary. Transfer documents for a substantial block of Pacific Northwest Furnishings stock. A company I'd thought he'd fully retired from. Notes about strategic contacts in the industry I should approach if he wasn't there to make the introductions himself. He had prepared for a future where he might not be present, and he had chosen to entrust that future to me. When I brought the file to the hospital the next day, Harold was sitting up, looking marginally better. "You didn't have to do any of this," I said, placing the folder on his bedside table. "Yes, I did," he replied simply. "You're the daughter I never had, Sarah. The child who would have actually appreciated what I built." His smile was tinged with sadness. My actual children only ever saw my business as an ATM. They never understood what it meant to create something from nothing. The surgery was scheduled for 7 gone the next morning. I arrived at 5:30, determined to see Harold before they took him in. He was remarkably calm, making jokes with the nurses and giving me last-minute advice about an upcoming meeting with a national retailer interested in carrying Evergreen products. "Remember," he said as they prepared to wheel him to the operating room, "let them make the first offer. Your products are worth more than you think." I kissed his forehead. "I'll see you in a few hours. We'll celebrate with that 30-year scotch you've been saving." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's a date." The surgery lasted longer than expected. 5 hours stretched to 7, then 8. I paced the waiting room, checking my phone periodically for emails from the office, but unable to focus on anything but the clock on the wall. Finally, the surgeon appeared, still in his scrubs, his expression grim. "We encountered more extensive damage than the scans indicated," he explained. We completed the bypass, but Mr. Wilson suffered complications during the procedure. He's in critical condition. But he'll recover? I asked, my voice small. The surgeon's hesitation told me everything. The next 24 hours will be crucial. We've placed him in a medically induced coma to give his body the best chance to heal. Harold never woke up. 3 days after the surgery, surrounded by machines, keeping his body functioning, his heart finally gave out. I was holding his hand when it happened, telling him about a new packaging design we were considering, pretending he could hear me, that he would open his eyes and offer his characteristically blunt feedback. Instead, the monitors flatlined, and Harold Wilson, the man who had believed in me when I barely believed in myself, was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight pressing on my chest. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I felt truly alone. The legal battles, the business challenges, the divorce proceedings, all of it seemed suddenly meaningless in the face of this loss. Megan found me in Harold's hospital room, still clutching his hand an hour after he'd been pronounced dead. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you home." "I can't go to the house," I said, thinking of the empty room still half filled with James's things. "I can't be there right now." "Then you'll stay with me," she said firmly. "For as long as you need." The next few weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, legal meetings about Harold's estate, and mechanical efforts to keep Evergreen running despite my emotional absence. I went through the motions, making decisions and attending meetings, but the purpose that had driven me for the past year seemed to have evaporated. Diana noticed the change during a strategy session about the ongoing divorce. "You're not yourself," she observed, "and that's understandable after what you've been through. But James's team is sensing weakness. They're pushing for a settlement again." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. "Maybe we should consider it, just to be done with this." Diana's expression sharpened. "That's not what Harold would want. And I don't think it's what you want either." "I don't know what I want anymore," I admitted. "Everything feels hollow." She closed her legal pad deliberately. "I'm saying this as your friend, not just your attorney. You need time to grieve, but you also need to remember why you started fighting in the first place. It wasn't just about the money or even the principle. It was about claiming your own power." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove to the warehouse later that day. The facility was humming with pre-holiday production, employees I'd personally hired working efficiently at stations I'd designed. This was real. This was mine. This was what Harold had helped me build and protect. Near the entrance, a large corkboard displayed customer letters and photos. People whose homes had been made more beautiful by Evergreen products, whose lives had been touched in some small way by what we created. I stood before this wall of connection, remembering the early days when each sale felt like a personal victory. Something shifted inside me. Harold was gone, but what he had helped me create remained. The best way to honor him wasn't to withdraw into grief, but to continue the work we had started together. That evening, I drove to Harold's house in the West Hills, using the key he had given me months ago. Elena, his housekeeper, greeted me with red-rimmed eyes. "He left instructions," she said, leading me to his study. "For after." On Harold's desk sat a single envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter, dated just a few weeks before his death. "Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm no longer around to tell you what you need to hear in person, so let this letter serve in my place." Harold's words were characteristically direct. He wrote about seeing in me the same drive and integrity he had valued in himself. He confessed that mentoring me had given purpose to his retirement years, and he urged me not to let grief or fatigue derail what we had built. "The worst thing we can do in this life," he wrote, "is allow others to define our worth or limit our potential. You've already proven you're stronger than that. Now finish what you started. The letter ended with a postscript. Check the wall safe behind the eye. Rothko. The combination is your birthday. There's something there you'll need. The safe contained a weathered leather portfolio. Inside were documents detailing James's business activities over the past year, including evidence that he had approached Harold 6 months earlier, seeking investment for what would become Woodland Essentials. I declined, Harold had noted, but kept the records in case they proved useful. Also in the portfolio was a flash drive containing emails between James and Tiffany, dating back 2 years before I discovered their affair. The emails discussed not just their relationship, but their long-term plans to leverage my business connections for their own ventures. Remember, patience, James had written. Sarah's building something we can use. Let her do the hard work, and we'll step in when the time is right. The cold calculation laid out in these exchanges cut through my grief like a knife, reigniting the determination that had fueled me before Harold's death. This wasn't just about protecting what was mine anymore. This was about exposing the truth. I called Diana the next morning. I have new evidence, I told her, and I'm ready to go on the offensive. With Diana's guidance, we filed a countersuit against James and Tiffany, alleging conspiracy to misappropriate business opportunities and breach of fiduciary duty. The emails provided compelling evidence that their relationship had begun while I was still building Evergreen, and that James had been sharing confidential information about my business plans with Tiffany from the beginning. The legal battle intensified, but this time I was no longer distracted by grief or uncertainty. I channeled my loss into focused determination, working longer hours and making bolder decisions for Evergreen's future. We launched a home fragrance collection that had been in development before Harold's death, naming the signature scent Wilson's Reserve in his honor. I personally oversaw the expansion into a Seattle warehouse to support our growing West Coast distribution, and I initiated talks with an East Coast distribution partner to bring Evergreen products nationwide. Through it all, I kept Harold's letter in my desk drawer, rereading it on days when the fight seemed too exhausting to continue. His belief in me became a compass when my own resolve wavered. The turning point in the legal proceedings came 3 months after Harold's death, when James's attorney requested a private meeting with Diana and me. My client is prepared to withdraw his claims regarding Evergreen Home Essentials, he stated, without preamble, in exchange for certain considerations. Diana raised an eyebrow. What considerations? A mutual non-disparagement agreement, withdrawal of the conspiracy countersuit, and a one-time payment of $2 million. I nearly laughed out loud. $2 million? For what exactly? The attorney's smile was strained. For Mr. Anderson's contributions to the formative stages of the business. His contributions? I repeated. You mean actively discouraging me? Or perhaps secretly plotting with his girlfriend to copy my business model? Those contributions? Diana placed a calming hand on my arm. What's prompted this sudden change in position? She asked the attorney. He cleared his throat. My client believes this resolution would be in everyone's best interest. What he didn't say, what we already knew from our own sources, was that Woodland Essentials was failing. Their hastily launched products had quality issues that resulted in high return rates. Their attempt to secure wider distribution had stalled when retailers learned of the pending litigation, and their initial investors were growing increasingly concerned about the venture's viability. Here's our counteroffer, Diana said. Mr. Anderson withdraws all claims related to Evergreen. He and Ms. Reynolds agree to cease operations of Woodland Essentials immediately. In exchange, we will withdraw the conspiracy suit and agree to a mutual non-disparagement clause. And the financial settlement? The attorney pressed. There will be none, I said firmly. The attorney gathered his papers. My client won't accept those terms. Then we'll see him in court, Diana replied smoothly. With the evidence from Harold Wilson's files. 2 days later, James called me directly for the first time in months, "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "Not through the lawyers. Just us." I hesitated. "About what?" "About ending this. All of it." His voice sounded tired. "Meet me for dinner. One conversation to put this behind us." Against Diana's advice, I agreed to meet James at a neutral location, a small bistro downtown where we had occasionally dined early in our marriage. I arrived intentionally late, unwilling to give him even a moment of thinking I was waiting for him. He looked different, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. For a moment, I felt an unwelcome twinge of the connection we had once shared. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "You look good." "Let's skip the small talk," I replied. "You wanted to talk about ending this." James sighed. "Woodland is finished. The investors pulled out last week. Tiffany's already looking for another job." I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a dull sense of justice being served. "I'm sorry it didn't work out," I said, not entirely truthfully. "No, you're not," he said with a hint of his old perceptiveness. "But you should be. We could have built something together, Sarah. Something bigger than Evergreen. We still could." I stared at him, incredulous. "Are you serious? After everything? That's happened. You still think we have a future together?" "Business-wise," he clarified quickly. "I'm not delusional enough to think we can salvage the marriage. But my connections, your products, it could still work." I shook my head slowly. "You really don't get it, do you? This was never just about business for me. It was about building something that was entirely mine. Something you couldn't take credit for or control." I leaned forward. "Something you couldn't mortgage away for your girlfriend." James flinched. "I made mistakes, serious ones. But this scorched earth approach isn't helping either of us." "It's helped me define my boundaries," I countered. "It's helped me understand my own worth. And it's helped me realize that I don't need your approval or participation to be successful." Something in my tone must have finally reached him. He sat back, studying me with new eyes. "You've changed," he said finally. "Yes," I agreed. "I have." We negotiated terms there in that small bistro without lawyers or posturing. James would withdraw all claims related to Evergreen and agree to the dissolution of Woodland Essentials. I would withdraw the conspiracy countersuit and agree to a clean division of our remaining personal assets. No financial settlement. No ongoing entanglements. "Is there anything else you want?" he asked as we prepared to leave. I considered the question. Once, I had wanted many things from James Anderson: love, respect, partnership, loyalty. Now I wanted only one thing. "Freedom," I said simply. "A clean break." He nodded slowly. "That I can give you." As I watched him walk away, I felt neither triumph nor regret, only a quiet certainty that this chapter of my life was finally closing. Our divorce was finalized on a crisp autumn day, almost exactly 1 year after I had discovered James's affair. The legal documents arrived by courier while I was reviewing designs for Evergreen's spring collection. I signed where indicated, officially ending 10 years of marriage with a few strokes of a pen. That evening, I opened a bottle of champagne Harold had given me after our first major retail account. "For celebrating milestones," he had said. This qualified, though perhaps not in the way either of us had anticipated. Megan joined me on the deck of my new home, a modernist structure on the outskirts of Portland with views of Mount Hood reminiscent of Harold's place in the West Hills. "To freedom," she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. "And new beginnings," I added. We were silent for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. "So what's next?" Megan asked. "World domination?" I laughed. "One step at a time. The East Coast expansion is keeping me busy enough for now." In truth, I had been thinking beyond just geographic expansion. Harold's passing had left a void not just emotionally, but strategically. His guidance had been invaluable in navigating the business world, and while I had grown more confident in my own instincts, I missed having a sounding board for major decisions. I had recently joined a group of women entrepreneurs who met monthly to discuss business challenges and opportunities. The connections I made there had already opened doors to new suppliers and potential collaborators. Life had settled into a new normal. Busy days at Evergreen, quiet evenings at home, occasional dinners with friends like Megan who had stood by me through the tumult of the past year. If it wasn't exactly the life I had envisioned when I married James, it was a life entirely of my own making. 5 months after the divorce was finalized, Evergreen celebrated its second anniversary with the opening of our first flagship store in downtown Portland. The launch party attracted local media, industry contacts, and loyal customers eager to see the full product line displayed in our carefully designed space. I was speaking with a reporter from a business journal when I spotted a familiar face across the crowded store. Tiffany Reynolds, looking slightly less polished than I remembered, was examining our new line of sustainable kitchen goods. My first instinct was to have security escort her out. Instead, curiosity propelled me across the room. "Interesting to see you here," I said, approaching her directly. Tiffany jumped slightly. "Sarah, congratulations on all this." She gestured at the bustling store. "It's impressive." "Thank you," I replied, studying her. "Are you here for a particular reason?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Partly curiosity. Partly—" She hesitated. "I suppose I wanted to see what real success looks like. As opposed to? As opposed to what James and I tried to create." She set down the candle she'd been holding. "Woodland was a mistake from the beginning. We were trying to copy something we didn't understand." The admission surprised me. "And James? How is he?" "I wouldn't know," Tiffany said. "We ended things right after Woodland folded. He's in Seattle now, I think. Some sales position." I felt a strange lack of emotion at this news. No satisfaction, no resentment, just a distant acknowledgement of information about someone who no longer factored into my life. "I should go," Tiffany said after an awkward silence. "I just wanted to see and maybe to say I'm sorry, for whatever that's worth." As she turned to leave, I found myself saying, "For what it's worth, I hope you find something of your own to build, something no one can take from you." She looked back, startled by the unexpected moment of connection. "I'm working on it," she said with a small smile before disappearing into the crowd. The encounter left me reflective throughout the remainder of the event. I had spent so long defining myself in opposition to James and Tiffany's betrayal that it was strange to realize they no longer held any power over my emotions or decisions. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and staff began cleaning up, Diana lingered to share a celebratory glass of champagne. "To Evergreen's continued success," she toasted. "Harold would be proud." I smiled at the mention of his name. "I think of him every day, especially on nights like this." "He left you a significant legacy," Diana observed. "Not just financially, but in confidence and knowledge." "I like to think I gave him something too," I said. "A purpose in those final months. Someone who truly appreciated what he had to teach." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "The best relationships are those where both parties bring value." She set down her glass. "Which reminds me, the executor of Harold's estate asked me to give you this tonight. Apparently, Harold left specific instructions about timing." She handed me a small rectangular package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a leather-bound day planner with Harold's initials embossed on the cover. A note was tucked into the first page. "For the next chapter," Harold had written, "look to October 15th. I flipped to that date, 6 months in the future, and found a business card paper-clipped to the page. "Takahashi Global," it read. Ichiro Takahashi, CEO. On the back, Harold had written, "When you're ready to go international." Even from beyond, Harold was still guiding my path forward, opening doors that I hadn't yet considered knocking on. The flagship store's success exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Within 3 months, we were exploring locations for a second store in Seattle. Evergreen's online presence grew exponentially thanks to a strategic partnership with a popular lifestyle website. And our wholesale business continued to expand, with products now available in over 500 retail locations nationwide. As October 15th approached, I found myself both excited and nervous about contacting Ichiro Takahashi. Harold's confidence in my readiness for international expansion was flattering but daunting. Was Evergreen truly prepared for that level of growth? Was I? I scheduled the call from my office overlooking the manufacturing floor, drawing strength from the visible evidence of what we had already built. Ichiro Takahashi proved to be a soft-spoken man in his 60s with impeccable English and a direct manner reminiscent of Harold. "Wilson-san spoke very highly of you," he said after introductions. "He believed your products would resonate strongly with Japanese consumers." "Did he approach you before his passing?" I asked, curious about how long Harold had been planning this connection. "We discussed various possibilities," Takahashi confirmed, "but he was insistent that we not proceed until you contacted me directly. He said you would know when the time was right." The conversation that followed opened my eyes to possibilities I had only vaguely considered. Takahashi Global had extensive experience bringing American brands to Asian markets, with an infrastructure that would allow Evergreen to establish presence in Japan, South Korea, and Singapore without the logistical nightmares of building from scratch. By the end of the call, we had scheduled a meeting in Tokyo for the following month. I hung up feeling a mixture of excitement and wistfulness. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Harold had been preparing me for, and I wished desperately that he could be here to see it unfold. The Tokyo trip was a whirlwind of meetings, site visits, and cultural experiences. Ichiro proved to be an invaluable guide, helping me understand not just the business landscape, but the subtle cultural nuances that would influence how Evergreen products were perceived and marketed. "Your emphasis on sustainability resonates deeply here," he explained as we toured a potential retail space in Ginza. "But the messaging must be adapted. Japanese consumers respond to different visual cues, different language about environmental responsibility." I absorbed every insight, taking copious notes and asking endless questions. This was a masterclass in international business, and I was determined to make the most of it. On my final evening in Tokyo, Ichiro invited me to dinner at an exclusive restaurant hidden on a quiet side street. The traditional multi-course meal was served in a private room overlooking an immaculate garden lit by stone lanterns. "I have a confession to make," Ichiro said as we were served delicate cups of sake. "My relationship with Harold Wilson went beyond business." I looked up, curious. "We were rivals once, in the 1980s, competing for the same distribution channels. In the American market, Harold outmaneuvered me quite thoroughly." His eyes crinkled with the memory. "I lost a significant contract and was forced to return to Japan somewhat diminished." "That must have been difficult," I said carefully. Ichiro nodded. "It was." But 2 years later, Harold contacted me with a proposal for a joint venture in the Asian market. He could have continued to compete against me, but instead, he offered partnership. He sipped his sake thoughtfully. When I asked why, he said simply that good business is not about destroying worthy opponents, but finding ways to create value together. The story aligned perfectly with the Harold I had known, strategic but ultimately guided by a philosophy that business could be both profitable and ethical. "He saw that same quality in you," Ichiro continued. "In our last conversation, before his surgery, he told me that you understood what truly matters in building something lasting." "And what's that?" I asked. Integrity, Ichiro said simply. The courage to defend what you've created while remaining open to genuine collaboration. As I flew home from Tokyo with a signed agreement for Evergreen's Asian expansion, I reflected on how far I had come from that uncertain woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal 2 years earlier. The journey hadn't been linear. There had been setbacks, grief, moments of doubt. But through it all, I had kept building, kept moving forward. Megan and Diana organized a small celebration when I returned, eager to hear about the Tokyo trip and the international opportunities it presented. I can hardly believe this is the same business that started in your garage, Megan marveled as I showed them the renderings for our planned Tokyo storefront. Sometimes I can't believe it either, I admitted. But then I remember that every step made sense at the time. Every decision led naturally to the next. Speaking of decisions, Diana said, I have some news that might interest you. James and Tiffany's attempt to launch a second business venture has failed. I set down my glass. They tried again? Diana nodded. A home organization concept this time, nothing to do with Evergreen's market. But apparently the reputation from Woodland's failure followed them. Investors backed out at the last minute. I was surprised by my own reaction. Not satisfaction, but a kind of distant pity. That's unfortunate, I said simply. You don't seem particularly pleased, Diana observed. I'm not particularly anything about it, I realized. Their choices don't affect me anymore. It was true. The anger that had once fueled me had transformed into something different. Not indifference exactly, but perspective. James and Tiffany had become characters in a story that was no longer central to my life, a chapter closed and put away. 3 months after the Tokyo trip, we held the grand opening of our Seattle store, with plans for San Francisco already underway. The Evergreen team had grown to over 70 employees, with a management structure that allowed me to focus on creative direction and strategic growth rather than day-to-day operations. I had just finished a meeting with our marketing team about the upcoming holiday campaign when my assistant informed me there was an unexpected visitor in reception. He says it's important, she added. Something about an anniversary. Curious, I made my way to the reception area. James was standing by the windows, looking out at the Portland skyline, hands in the pockets of an expensive-looking suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. James, I said as I approached, this is a surprise. He turned, and I was struck by how much older he looked. Not just the physical changes of 2 years, but something in his eyes that spoke of hard lessons learned. Sarah, he replied with a small nod. Thank you for seeing me. What can I do for you? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Today would have been our 10th anniversary, he said, if things had been different. I hadn't realized the date. That part of my history had receded so completely that the significance of May 12th had entirely escaped me. I see, I said, uncertain how to respond. Is that why you're here? James glanced around the reception area with its understated elegance and Evergreen's distinctive logo displayed prominently on the wall behind the desk. Partly, he admitted. And partly to see this for myself, to see what you've built. He hesitated. What we could have built together if I hadn't been so blind. I felt a surge of emotions, not the hurt or anger of before, but a complex mix of memories, regrets, and ultimately, gratitude for the path that had led me here. Would you like a tour? I offered, surprising myself. James looked equally surprised. Are you sure? I nodded. It's not a secret. We're featured in business journals regularly these days. I showed him through the offices, the design studio, and finally to my favorite spot, a balcony overlooking the manufacturing floor where workers expertly crafted the products that had become Evergreen's hallmark. This is incredible, Sarah, he said as we watched the activity below. You've accomplished more than I ever imagined possible. Thank you, I said simply. I owe you an apology, he continued, his eyes still on the manufacturing floor. Not just for the affair or the lies, but for never really seeing you, your potential, your determination. He turned to face me directly. I underestimated you, in every possible way, and I'm sorry for that. The apology was unexpected, and I took a moment to consider my response. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally, but I've made peace with our history, James. It shaped me, but it doesn't define me anymore. He nodded slowly. I'm glad to hear that. I'm still working on my own peace. He reached into his jacket and removed an envelope. This is why I really came today. There's a charity auction next month benefiting foster children. I'm on the committee, and we're seeking donations from local businesses. Evergreen products would be a significant draw. I accepted the envelope, strangely touched by the normality of the request. Not reconciliation, not further apologies, just a straightforward business interaction between two people with a complicated past. I'll have our donation team contact the organizers, I promised. It's a good cause. As we walked back toward reception, James hesitated. There's something else I've been wanting to tell you. I'm moving back to Chicago next month. Fresh start. I hope it goes well for you, I said sincerely. I've learned a lot these past 2 years, he added, about consequences, about what matters. A rueful smile crossed his face. Expensive lessons. In the reception area, we shook hands formally, the gesture marking both closure and a new, distant kind of respect. Goodbye, Sarah, he said, and congratulations on everything you've built. After he left, I returned to my office and found myself drawn to the small framed photograph on my desk. Not of James or even of Harold, but of the first evergreen products I had created in my garage workshop. Handcrafted candles and simple, textile goods arranged on a makeshift display at a local craft fair. That crafting hobby, the one James had dismissed and Tiffany had tried to copy, had grown into an international brand employing dozens of people and bringing my creative vision to homes across the country and soon, around the world. The journey had been nothing like I'd imagined when I married James a decade earlier. The path had been harder, lonelier at times, but ultimately, more rewarding than the comfortable life I'd once envisioned as his wife. My phone chimed with a notification, Ichiro Takahashi confirming our video call for the following morning to discuss the Tokyo store's opening timeline. I smiled as I sent a quick reply, already mentally preparing for the next phase of Evergreen's Kurtha. Outside my office window, Portland sparkled in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere in that cityscape was the house where James and I had lived, where I had discovered his betrayal, where I had made the decision to fight rather than surrender. I didn't regret a single step of the journey that had led me here. Not the pain, not the battles, not even the losses. Each had shaped me, strengthened me, prepared me for challenges I couldn't yet imagine. The intercom buzzed. Your 3 o'clock is here, my assistant announced. The sustainability consultant for the San Francisco location. Send them in, I replied, turning away from the window and the past it represented. It was time to focus on the future, my future, built with my own hands, secured by my own determination, expanding in directions limited only by my imagination and courage. The door opened, and I stepped forward with a confident smile, ready for whatever came next. 6 months after James's unexpected visit, Evergreen's Tokyo store opened to enthusiastic crowds and media attention. The minimalist aesthetic we had developed specifically for the Japanese market resonated strongly with local consumers who appreciated our commitment to sustainable materials and ethical production methods. I stood in the center of the bustling store, observing customers examining our products with careful attention to detail. The scent of our specially created cherry blossom and hinoki fragrance line filled the air. a blend developed through extensive collaboration with local perfumers to appeal to Japanese sensibilities while maintaining Evergreen's distinctive, natural approach. This exceeds even our most optimistic projections, Ichiro murmured beside me, watching as another customer approached the register with an armful of products. The pre-orders for the subscription boxes are already at capacity. I nodded, trying to absorb the reality of what we had accomplished. From a garage workshop in Portland to an international brand with dedicated followers on multiple continents, the trajectory still seemed surreal at times. We should celebrate, Ichiro suggested. I've reserved a private room at Kozue, the view of Mount Fuji at sunset is unparalleled. The celebratory dinner stretched late into the evening, with Ichiro's team and my core staff who had traveled for the opening enjoying traditional Japanese cuisine and sake. As conversation flowed around me, I found myself reflecting on the unlikely series of events that had brought me to this moment. If James hadn't betrayed me, if I hadn't discovered his affair, if Harold hadn't appeared in my life at precisely the right moment, would I be sitting in a prestigious Tokyo restaurant celebrating the international expansion of my company? Or would I still be making candles in our garage, believing James's dismissive assessment of my potential? "A yen for your thoughts," Ichiro said quietly, using the English expression with a small smile at his own joke. "I was just thinking about paths not taken," I admitted. "How different life might have been without certain catalysts." Ichiro nodded thoughtfully. "In Japan, we have a concept called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The philosophy behind it is that breakage and repair are part of the history of an object, not something to disguise." He raised his sake cup. "Your story has such golden repairs, I think." The metaphor stayed with me long after the dinner ended, through the remainder of our Tokyo visit, and the subsequent expansion into Seoul 2 months later. I had never thought of my experience with James as something to be highlighted rather than hidden, but there was truth in Ichiro's perspective. The fracture points in my life had indeed become the strongest places, reinforced by the difficult decisions made in their aftermath. Upon returning to Portland, I found the company headquarters buzzing with a new energy. Our head of product development, Lydia Chen, had been experimenting with a line of children's bedroom decor that aligned with Evergreen's sustainable ethos, while introducing playful elements that hadn't previously been part of our brand identity. "The market research is extremely promising," Lydia explained as she walked me through prototypes arranged in our design studio. "Eco-conscious parents are desperately seeking alternatives to the plastic-heavy options currently dominating the children's market." I examined a wooden mobile of woodland creatures, each piece hand-carved from sustainably harvested maple and finished with non-toxic stains in gentle colors. "This is beautiful work, Lydia." "There's more," she said, leading me to another display area. "We've developed a complete nursery collection: organic cotton crib sheets, plant-based stuffed animals, wall art using our natural dyes." The collection was exquisite, sophisticated enough to appeal to parents while clearly designed with children's delight in mind. Something about it triggered an unexpected emotional response, a tightness in my chest I couldn't immediately identify. "Are you all right?" Lydia asked, noticing my expression. "Yes," I assured her quickly. "It's just, this is different from our usual offerings, in a good way." Later that evening, alone in my house overlooking the city, I realized what had prompted my reaction. The children's collection represented a future I had once imagined with James. A nursery in our home, a family we would build together. That dream had died with our marriage, set aside in the drive to establish Evergreen and secure my independence. I hadn't thought about children, about family, in years. The company had become my focus, my purpose, consuming the energy that might have gone into personal relationships. While I had close friendships with people like Megan and professional connections with colleagues like Diana, my romantic life had remained non-existent since the divorce. The realization wasn't so much regret as recognition of choices made, priorities established, paths not taken. I hadn't consciously decided against having a family. I had simply been focused elsewhere, healing from betrayal and building something lasting. The following week, our marketing team presented concepts for launching the children's collection. "We're calling it Evergreen Seedlings," explained Naomi, our creative director, playing on the idea of nurturing new growth. The presentation was comprehensive, including a launch timeline, influencer partnerships with eco-conscious parent bloggers, and a series of pop-up events in key markets. "There's something else," Naomi added, seeming slightly nervous. "We believe this collection presents an opportunity to expand Evergreen's mission. We'd like to propose partnering with organizations supporting foster children, donating a portion of proceeds, and creating special edition items specifically to benefit kids in the system." The suggestion immediately brought to mind the charity auction James had mentioned during his visit, the one benefiting foster children. We had donated products as promised, but I hadn't attended the event or followed up on its success. "I think that's an excellent idea," I said, surprising Naomi, with my immediate enthusiasm. "In fact, I'd like to take it further. What if we created employment opportunities for young adults aging out of the foster system? Training programs, internships, actual jobs in production or retail?" The concept evolved rapidly from there, with our HR and operations teams joining the discussion to explore practical implementation. By the end of the day, we had the framework for the Evergreen Growth Initiative, a comprehensive program that would extend beyond charitable donations to create tangible opportunities for young people often overlooked in the job market. Diana arrived for our monthly legal review as these plans were taking shape. After we concluded our regular business, I shared the new initiative with her. "This is quite a departure," she observed. "Not just a new product line, but a significant commitment to social impact." "Do you think it's too ambitious?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not at all, but I am curious about the timing. This feels personal in a way that your other business decisions haven't." I considered her observation. "Maybe it is. James mentioned being involved with a foster children's charity when he visited. It might have planted a seed." I smiled at the unintentional wordplay. "But beyond that, I've been thinking about legacy, about what Evergreen means beyond just commercial success." "Harold would approve," Diana said. "He always said business was about more than profit margins." We spent another hour discussing the legal structure for the initiative, ensuring it would be properly integrated into Evergreen's operations while maintaining clear financial boundaries for tax and reporting purposes. As Diana was preparing to leave, she hesitated. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. It's about James." I felt a flutter of apprehension. "What about him?" "He didn't move to Chicago as planned," she said. "He's still in Portland. I ran into him at a fundraiser last month. He's working with a nonprofit that helps foster kids transition to independent living." The information was unexpected. "That's surprising." Diana nodded. "I thought so too. He seemed different. More grounded somehow. He mentioned that your donation to the auction had been significant in reaching their funding goal." I absorbed this information with mixed emotions. The James the Fart had known had been ambitious, materialistic, focused on appearances and status. Working for a nonprofit, especially one serving vulnerable children, seemed entirely out of character. "People can change, I suppose," I said finally. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to recognize what matters," Diana replied. "You of all people understand transformation." The conversation lingered in my thoughts as we moved forward with both the Seedlings collection and the Growth Initiative. I found myself increasingly involved in the social impact aspects of the project, attending planning meetings I might normally have delegated, and personally reaching out to organizations serving foster youth. During one such call with the director of Portland Youth Transitions, I was surprised to hear that they already had a corporate partner involved in similar work. Yes, James Anderson has been developing our vocational training program for the past year, the director explained. He's actually restructured our entire approach to job readiness. The coincidence was too specific to ignore. James Anderson is involved with your organization? He's our director of corporate engagement, she confirmed. Came to us from the business world with excellent connections and a passion for our mission. Are you acquainted? We've met, I said carefully. I'd be interested in learning more about your training program. Perhaps we could schedule a visit. The director was enthusiastic about showcasing their work, and we arranged for me to tour their facility the following week. I debated whether to give James advance notice of my visit, but ultimately decided against it. Our paths might not even cross if he was primarily working off-site with corporate partners. The Portland Youth Transition Center occupied a renovated warehouse in an industrial area undergoing revitalization. The space was bright and welcoming, with areas dedicated to different aspects of their program: classrooms, computer labs, a commercial kitchen for culinary training, and workshop spaces for hands-on vocational skills. The director, Elena Martinez, guided me through each section, introducing me to staff and participants. I was genuinely impressed by the comprehensive approach they had developed, addressing not just employment skills, but the full spectrum of challenges facing young adults transitioning from foster care to independence. And this is our newest addition, Elena said proudly, leading me into a large open space with modular workstations. Our business incubator, where participants can develop entrepreneurial skills and launch their own small businesses with mentorship from corporate volunteers. At the far end of the room, James was sitting at a table with two young women, reviewing something on a laptop. He looked up as we entered, surprise registering on his face when he saw me. "Sarah," he said, standing. "I didn't realize you were visiting today. Ms. Anderson is exploring a potential partnership between Evergreen and our organization," Elena explained, unaware of our history. "Her company is launching an initiative to create employment pathways for foster youth." James recovered quickly from his surprise. Evergreen would be an excellent partner. Their commitment to sustainability aligns with the values we're trying to instill in our entrepreneurship program. The professionalism in his tone helped ease the awkwardness of the moment. Elena introduced the young women as Deja and Kimberly, participants developing a business plan for a mobile beauty service targeting seniors in assisted living facilities. "James has been helping us with our financial projections," Deja explained, "making sure we understand all the startup costs and how to price our services." I found myself genuinely curious. What inspired this particular business idea? "My grandmother was in a nursing home," Kimberly said. "She always talked about how much she missed getting her hair done regularly. It was about dignity for her, not just beauty." The conversation flowed naturally from there, with the young women enthusiastically sharing their research and plans. Their passion was infectious, and I found myself offering suggestions about marketing and customer retention based on Evergreen's experience. Throughout the exchange, I was acutely aware of James's presence, his attentive listening, the thoughtful questions he posed to help Deja and Kimberly refine their thinking. This patient, nurturing approach was entirely at odds with the dismissive attitude he had once shown toward my own business aspirations. After the young women left to attend a scheduled workshop, Elena excused herself to take a phone call, leaving James and me alone in the incubator space. "You seem surprised," he said after a moment of silence. "I am," I admitted. "This isn't the career path I would have predicted for you." He smiled slightly. "It wasn't exactly in my 5-year plan either." "What happened?" I asked, genuinely curious about the transformation. James gestured to the workstations around us. "After Woodland failed, after Tiffany left, I had to take a hard look at what I really wanted. Status, money, the appearance of success. None of it brought me any actual satisfaction. He paused. Watching you build something meaningful, something that reflected your values, made me realize how hollow my own ambitions had been. So you decided to work with foster youth? Not immediately, he admitted. I was still trying to figure out my next business venture when a friend invited me to that charity auction, the one where Evergreen donated products. I ended up talking with some of the kids in the program, hearing their stories. His expression sobered. Many of them had experienced betrayal far worse than what I did to you. Yet they were still trying, still believing they could build something worthwhile from the ashes of their past. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever had led James to this work, his commitment to it now seemed genuine. I started volunteering, he continued. Just a few hours a week, helping with resume writing and interview skills. It felt useful in a way nothing in my previous career ever had. He smiled ruefully. When they offered me a staff position, I took a 90% pay cut from my last corporate job. Best decision I ever made. I found myself unsure how to respond. This version of James, reflective, purposeful, apparently sincere in his dedication to helping others, was so far removed from the man who had betrayed me that it was difficult to reconcile the two. You don't have to believe me, he said, correctly reading my hesitation. Actions matter more than words. I've learned that much, at least. Before I could respond, Elena returned, apologizing for the interruption. James, would you mind joining us for the rest of the tour? You could speak to some of the specific ways corporate partners can engage with our participants. The remainder of the visit was focused on practical matters, the structure of internship programs, mentorship opportunities, potential retail partnerships for products created by program participants. James was knowledgeable and professional, showing none of the competitive edge that had characterized our interactions immediately following our separation. As the tour concluded, Elena expressed enthusiasm about the potential collaboration between Portland Youth Transitions and Evergreen. I'll send over our partnership documentation this week, she promised. And please feel free to contact James directly with any questions about our vocational programs. He's our expert on corporate engagement. Outside the building, James walked me to my car. For what it's worth, he said, I think Evergreen's initiative is exactly what these kids need. A chance to be part of building something meaningful, not just holding down a job. I studied him in the afternoon light, searching for signs of the manipulation I had grown to expect during our marriage. Instead, I saw only earnestness and perhaps a touch of nervousness. This matters to you, I observed. It's not just a job. It's become my purpose, he replied simply. Something I should have found years ago, before I hurt you and others with my selfishness. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. Not just the betrayal and divorce, but the years before that. Dreams discussed, promises made, possibilities imagined together before everything fractured. I should go, I said finally. I have a video call with our Soul team this evening. James nodded. Of course. Thank you for considering our organization for your initiative. Regardless of our personal history, these kids deserve the opportunity. As I drove back to Evergreen's headquarters, I found myself in uncharted emotional territory. The anger that had fueled me during our divorce had long since burned away, replaced by indifference and occasional pity. But this, seeing James apparently transformed, genuinely committed to meaningful work, evoked more complex feelings. Not regret, exactly. Not a wish to undo the divorce or reconsider our relationship, but perhaps a tentative respect for the person he seemed to be becoming, so different from the man I had married. The following weeks were consumed with preparations for the Seedlings Collection launch and the formal announcement of the Growth Initiative. Our marketing team had developed a compelling campaign highlighting the connection between nurturing children's environments and nurturing their futures through educational and employment opportunities. Diana reviewed the final partnership agreement with Portland Youth Transitions, suggesting minor modifications to protect both organizations' interests while establishing clear metrics for success. "There's one detail we need to address," she said during our final review. "James Anderson is named as the primary contact for program coordination. Given your history, would you prefer we request an alternative liaison?" I considered the question carefully. "No, that won't be necessary. We can maintain a professional relationship for the sake of the program." Diana raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. The launch event for Evergreen Seedlings was held at our flagship Portland store, transformed for the evening into a woodland-themed wonderland showcasing the children's collection. Local families with young children had been invited, along with media, influencers, and representatives from partner organizations including Portland Youth Transitions. I was speaking with a mommy blogger whose endorsement had been crucial in building early interest when I spotted James across the room, engaged in conversation with Megan. My friend's body language was initially reserved, but as their discussion continued, her posture relaxed slightly. Later, when I had a moment alone with her near the refreshment table, I asked about their interaction. "He was actually decent," Megan admitted reluctantly. "Talked about the kids in his program, how much the partnership with Evergreen could mean for them." She studied me carefully. "He's different than I remember." "That's what I thought too," I said. "Hard to reconcile with the James we knew." Megan sipped her sparkling water thoughtfully. "People can change, I suppose. Though I'm not advocating forgiveness or anything," she added quickly. "Just acknowledging the observation." "Noted," I said with a small smile. As the evening progressed, I found myself watching James intermittently. He moved through the event with none of the networking aggression that had once characterized his approach to business gatherings. Instead, he spent most of his time with the representatives from youth organizations, listening more than speaking, his focus clearly on the potential impact for the young people they served. Near the end of the event, as guests were beginning to depart, James approached me directly. "Congratulations," he said, gesturing to the displays around us. "The collection is beautiful, and the initiative behind it is even more impressive." "Thank you," I replied. "The response has been overwhelmingly positive." He nodded. "Elena asked me to confirm our first planning meeting for the internship program. Would Wednesday at 2 work for your team?" "Yes, that's already on the calendar," I assured him. "Lydia Chen, our head of product development, will be leading the program from our side." "Perfect," he said. "Lydia and I spoke earlier about potentially creating a specialized training track for product design. The easy professionalism of our exchange felt surreal given our history, yet also strangely comfortable. For the first time since our divorce, we were engaging as colleagues with a shared purpose rather than adversaries with competing interests. As James turned to leave, he hesitated. "There's something I've wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure if it would be welcome." At my questioning, "Look," he continued, "I've been following Evergreen's growth, your international expansion. What you've built is remarkable, Sarah. Truly. And while I know it doesn't change anything between us, I want you to know that I recognize now what I failed to see when we were together, your extraordinary talent and vision." The compliment was unexpected, delivered without the charm offensive that had once been his signature style, just simple honesty in his voice and eyes. "Thank you," I said after a moment. "That means something coming from where we started." He nodded once, understanding the reference to his early dismissal of my business aspirations. "Good night, Sarah. I'll see you at the planning meeting." As the event concluded and the last guests departed, I found myself standing alone in the center of the store, surrounded by the physical manifestation of all I had built. Products designed with intention, a brand with integrity, a company with purpose beyond profit. The path that had led here had been neither straight nor easy. It had been shaped by betrayal and mentorship, loss and determination, failure and resilience. Each turn, Each obstacle, each unexpected ally had contributed to both the business Evergreen had become and the person I had become while building it. Outside, the Portland night was clear and cool, stars visible despite the city lights. I thought of Harold, imagining how he would have enjoyed this evening, the successful launch, the purposeful initiative, the elegant resolution of the conflict that had once threatened to define me. "You were right," I whispered to his memory as I gazed up at the constellation he had once pointed out to me during a late strategy session at his cabin. It was always about more than revenge or even success. It was about becoming the person who could build something lasting. The next morning brought news that our Tokyo store had exceeded first-quarter projections by 30%. Seoul was performing equally well, and Ichiro had begun exploring possibilities for expansion into Singapore ahead of our original timeline. Domestically, early sales figures for the Seedlings collection were strong, with the organic crib linens selling out online within hours of the launch. Our social media mentions had increased significantly, with particular enthusiasm for the growth initiative and its potential impact for foster youth. As I reviewed these reports in my office, my assistant announced that the first applications had arrived for our internship program. Among them was a proposal from Deja and Kimberly, the young women I had met at Portland Youth Transitions, who were interested in adapting their senior beauty service concept to include Evergreen products. Their application was thoughtful and detailed, showing clear influence from both James's business guidance and their own lived experience. They had identified a genuine market need and developed a service model that addressed it with dignity and care. I made a note to have our product development team explore the possibility of creating a specialized line for senior care facilities, perhaps an extension of the Seedlings concept focused on the other end of the life cycle. Evergreen roots, perhaps, honoring the wisdom and needs of older generations. The idea felt right, a natural evolution of our brand ethos and another opportunity to create meaningful impact beyond commercial success. It would require new partnerships, additional research, careful product development. The challenges were significant but exciting. I opened my calendar to block time for initial concept development, scanning the upcoming weeks filled with meetings, calls with international teams, planning sessions for future growth. The business I had built to secure my independence had become something far larger, a vehicle for creativity, purpose, and positive change. My phone chimed with a text from Megan. "Lunch tomorrow to celebrate the successful launch? I'm thinking that new place on the waterfront." I smiled as I typed. My reply, "Perfect. I have some new ideas to run by you." Setting down my phone, I turned to the wall of windows overlooking Portland, the city where my journey had begun in a garage workshop and a broken marriage. So much had changed since then. The business, the relationships, my own understanding of what success truly meant. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. New markets to navigate, competitors to outmaneuver, innovations to develop. The path forward would have its own obstacles and unexpected turns, but I faced them now from a position of confidence rather than desperation, purpose rather than pain. The empire I had built from betrayal's ashes wasn't just a business success story. It was a testament to resilience, to growth beyond trauma, to the possibility of creating beauty and meaning from life's most difficult moments. And whatever came next, whether further expansion, new partnerships, or personal evolution, I would face it not as the woman who had once defined herself by a husband's betrayal, but as Sarah Anderson, founder and CEO of Evergreen Home Essentials, architect of her own extraordinary future. The anniversary dinner was my idea. 10 years since I had launched Evergreen Home Essentials from my garage, 5 years since we'd expanded internationally, and 3 years since the Growth Initiative had created opportunities for over 200 foster youth. These milestones deserved recognition, not just of business success, but of the journey that had transformed both the company and me. I reserved the private dining room at Waterfront Grill, the upscale restaurant overlooking the Willamette River, where James and I had once celebrated our own anniversaries in what felt like another lifetime. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, though it no longer carried the emotional weight it once might have. The guest list was carefully curated. My executive team, key investors, Megan and Diana, whose friendship and guidance had been instrumental throughout. Ichiro Takahashi, flying in from Tokyo for the occasion, and representatives from our partner organizations, including James, whose work coordinating the internship program had helped make it one of our most successful initiatives. Our professional relationship over the past years had evolved into something I wouldn't quite call friendship, but that held a measure of mutual respect neither of us could have imagined during our acrimonious divorce. The wounds had healed, leaving scars that marked but no longer pained. I arrived early to verify the arrangements, a habit I'd never shed despite having an exceptionally competent events team. The restaurant manager guided me through the space, pointing out the display areas we'd requested for showcasing the evolution of evergreen products from those first handcrafted candles to our current expansive catalog. The florist delivered, "These for your centerpieces," he said, indicating arrangements that featured our signature eucalyptus wreaths interwoven with seasonal blooms. "And the special champagne has been chilled as requested." I nodded approval, pausing to adjust one of the historical product displays. A recreation of my original craft fair setup positioned at the entrance to greet guests with a visual reminder of our humble beginnings. People began arriving promptly. At 7, the room gradually filling with conversation and laughter. I circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations and sharing memories of Evergreen's development. Ichiro presented me with a hand-carved wooden box containing artisanal Japanese incense, created exclusively for our Tokyo store's anniversary. "A reminder," he said, "that the best collaborations honor both traditions." Diana arrived with her wife, both elegant in complimentary evening wear. "I can hardly believe it's been 10 years, she said, embracing me warmly. "Though the legal files documenting every step don't lie." "None of this would have happened without you," I reminded her. "Your foresight saved Evergreen before it was even fully formed." She smiled. "I merely provided the tools. You built the house." James arrived last, apologizing for his lateness. "Budget meeting ran over," he explained. "End of fiscal year chaos." "I remember it well," I replied. "Non-profit budgets are even more challenging than corporate ones." He nodded, looking around the room appreciatively. "Quite a gathering of talent. You've built an impressive network." "More of a community," I corrected gently. "People who believe in what we're trying to accomplish." As guests found their seats, I took my place at the head of the long table. The agenda called for dinner first, followed by a brief presentation highlighting Evergreen's decade of growth, and then recognition of key contributors to our success. The first course had just been served when the restaurant manager approached, looking apologetic. "Ms. Anderson, there's someone asking to join your party. A Ms. Reynolds? She's quite insistent that she was invited." I froze, my wine glass halfway, to my lips. Tiffany Reynolds, a name I hadn't heard or thought about in years. "I didn't invite her," I said carefully. "Could you please inform her this is a private event?" The manager nodded and retreated, but returned moments later looking more uncomfortable. "I'm very sorry, but she's causing a scene in the main dining room. She's claiming this is a business dinner she has a right to attend." Across the table, James had gone pale. "I'll handle this," he said, rising from his seat. "No," I countered, setting down my napkin. "I'll go." The quiet confidence in my voice silenced whatever protest he might have made. This was my event, my company's celebration. I would not allow it to be disrupted by ghosts from the past. I followed the manager through the restaurant to find Tiffany standing near the host station, dressed in an outfit too formal for a typical dinner, but not quite elegant enough for our event. She had aged in the years since I'd last seen her, not poorly, but with a hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Tiffany," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "This is a surprise." She turned, a tight smile fixed on her face. "Sarah, so good to see you." Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "I heard about Evergreen's anniversary celebration. I thought I should be here, given my history with the company." "You have no history with Evergreen," I corrected evenly. "This is a private event. For those who contributed to our success." Her smile faltered. "Oh, but I did contribute, didn't I? If James hadn't been so distracted by our relationship, he might have stifled your little candle business before it got off the ground." The restaurant manager looked increasingly alarmed, glancing between us as other diners began to notice the tension. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," I suggested. Tiffany laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "Always so proper, Sarah. So controlled. Don't you ever just let loose? Feel something real?" I met her gaze steadily. "Every day. That's how I built Evergreen. With real passion, real purpose, real commitment." Something flickered in her eyes. Anger, perhaps, or envy. "You think you're so superior, don't you? With your perfect company and your perfect life." "Not perfect," I corrected. "Authentic. There's a difference." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Did you know James and I reconnected recently? Had dinner last month for old time's sake? He still has that charm, doesn't he? That way of making you feel like the only woman in the room." I felt a flicker of surprise, quickly suppressed. Whether true or not, Tiffany's revelation was meant to provoke a reaction, to insert herself back into a narrative she had long since exited. "Tiffany," I said calmly, "whatever relationship you may or may not have with James is none of my concern. He's been an excellent program coordinator for our youth initiative, and that's the extent of my interest." Her expression shifted, frustration replacing the smug certainty she had projected moments before. This wasn't going according to whatever script she had imagined. "You don't understand," she insisted. "I'm not just here about James. I'm here about what's mine." This was unexpected. "Excuse me?" "Woodland Essentials," she said, as if the name should have immediate significance. "The company James and I started, the one you destroyed with your lawsuits and your industry connections." I blinked, genuinely confused. "Woodland Essentials failed because it was poorly executed and underfinanced. That was years ago, Tiffany." "It failed because you sabotaged us," she countered. "And now that Evergreen is wildly successful, I want my share. Half of what should have been mine if you hadn't interfered." The absurdity of her demand might have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic. I felt an unexpected wave of pity for this woman, still clinging to grievances and entitlements from another era of my life. "Ms. Reynolds," the restaurant manager interjected, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Not until I get what I came for," Tiffany insisted, her voice rising. "I want recognition for my contribution to Evergreen's success story." "Your contribution?" I repeated incredulously. "And what exactly do you believe that was?" "I inspired you," she said with absolute conviction. "Your entire empire was built as a reaction to discovering me with James. Without that motivation, where would you be? Still making candles in your garage, playing at being a businesswoman while James supported you." Her analysis was so fundamentally flawed, so detached from the reality of what had actually transpired, that I found myself momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, James appeared beside us, his expression grave. "Tiffany," he said quietly, "this isn't appropriate. These people are celebrating legitimate achievements." She whirled on him. "Don't pretend you're one of them now, James. These success stories always need a villain, and you played yours perfectly. But so did I, and I deserve credit." A small crowd of restaurant staff had gathered at a discreet distance, prepared to intervene if the situation escalated further. I could see curious diners watching from their tables, some openly staring, others pretending not to notice while clearly listening to every word. "Perhaps," I suggested to the manager, "we could use your office for a few minutes." He nodded. Quickly, relieved at the prospect of moving the disturbance out of public view. "Of course, right this way." The office was small but private, with a desk and several chairs. James closed the door behind us, creating a bubble of tense silence after the murmuring backdrop of the restaurant. "What's this really about, Tiffany?" he asked directly. "We haven't spoken in over 2 years, and suddenly you're showing up at Sarah's business event making claims about Evergreen?" Tiffany sank into one of the chairs, her bravado faltering slightly. "You don't understand what it's been like watching from the sidelines. Seeing her succeed while She trailed off. "While you what?" I prompted, genuinely curious now about whatever narrative she had constructed. "While I struggled to rebuild after Woodland failed," she finished. "Do you know how hard it is to be associated with a failed business venture in this town? The doors that close when your name is linked to James Anderson's spectacular flop?" I considered her words carefully. "That must have been difficult," I acknowledged. "But it has nothing to do with me or with Evergreen." "It has everything to do with you," she insisted. "You were supposed to be the sad ex-wife, the one left behind. Instead, you became this success story. This feminist icon building an empire while poor betrayed Sarah rose from the ashes." The distortion in her perspective was both fascinating and disturbing. In Tiffany's version of events, I had somehow stolen a narrative that rightfully belonged to her, cast her as villain in a story where she should have been triumphant heroine. "Tiffany," I said gently, "my success wasn't about you. It wasn't even about James, ultimately. It was about creating something meaningful, something that reflected my values and vision." She shook her head dismissively. "Save the inspirational speeches for your TED Talk, Sarah. I know better. You built Evergreen to prove James wrong, to show him what he lost when he chose me." James cleared his throat. "That might have been how it started," he admitted. "But Sarah's accomplishments go far beyond reacting to what happened between us." He met my eyes briefly. I learned that the hard way. Tiffany looked between us, her expression hardening. "So that's it? You're both on the same side now? The reformed cheater and the successful entrepreneur united in your superiority?" "There are no sides," I said, feeling suddenly weary of this conversation. "Just people who made choices and lived with the consequences." She laughed bitterly. "Easy to say when your consequences led to millions in revenue and magazine features. Mine led to industry blacklisting and financial ruin." A knock at the door interrupted whatever response I might have offered. The restaurant manager opened it cautiously. "Excuse me, Ms. Anderson, but your guests are wondering about your return. Should I inform them there will be a delay?" I looked at Tiffany, at the mixture of anger and desperation in her expression, and made a decision. "No, that won't be necessary. We're concluding our conversation now." Tiffany stood abruptly. "So that's it? You're dismissing me? Again?" "I'm returning to my guests," I corrected. "This event is about celebrating Evergreen's journey and the people who contributed positively to that path. You're not among them, Tiffany." "I want compensation," she stated flatly. "For my role in your origin story, for the opportunities I lost when Woodland failed." James stepped forward. "Tiffany, you need to stop this. You have no legal claim to anything related to Evergreen." "It's not about legality," she snapped. "It's about fairness, about acknowledging that without me there would be no Evergreen empire." I studied her for a long moment, recognizing the particular desperation of someone whose narrative about their own life has crumbled under the weight of reality. She needed to believe she was central to my success story, because the alternative, that she had been merely an unpleasant footnote, was too difficult to accept. "Tiffany," I said finally, "I do acknowledge that discovering your affair with James was a catalyst for change in my life. But catalysts aren't creators. They simply accelerate reactions already primed to occur." Her expression remained obstinate. "I want half. Half of what you built on the foundation of that catalyst." The absurdity of her demand might have angered me once. Now it merely reinforced how profoundly our paths had diverged. "What I built," I said quietly, "was built on talent, hard work, vision, and the support of countless people who believed in Evergreen's potential. None of that had anything to do with you." James placed a hand on Tiffany's shoulder. "It's time to go. I'll call you a car." She shrugged off his touch. "Don't bother. I'm perfectly capable of seeing myself out." She gathered her purse, pausing at the door to deliver what she clearly imagined would be a parting shot. "This isn't over, Sarah. People should know the real story behind Evergreen's success." After she left, James and I stood in awkward silence. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry about that. I had no idea she would show up here." "Did you really have dinner with her last month?" I asked, curious rather than concerned. He looked surprised by the question. "No, I haven't seen Tiffany in years, not since Woodland folded." I nodded, unsurprised by the confirmation that she had fabricated the connection. "We should get back to the dinner." As we walked toward the private dining room, James hesitated. "For what it's worth, she was wrong about one thing in particular. You would have built something remarkable regardless of what happened between us. Maybe not Evergreen exactly as it exists now, but something equally meaningful." The observation caught me off guard. Not because it was untrue, but because it reflected a level of insight I wouldn't have expected from the James I had married. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. The anniversary dinner continued. Without further disruption, though I noticed curious glances from guests who had obviously registered my extended absence. Megan raised an eyebrow questioningly when I returned to my seat, but I shook my head slightly, promising with a look to explain later. The presentation highlighting Evergreen's decade of growth proceeded as planned, showcasing the evolution from local artisan crafts to international lifestyle brand. Photos of our first warehouse, our flagship store opening, the Tokyo launch, and the Seedlings collection debut illustrated the company's remarkable trajectory. When it came time to recognize key contributors, I found myself making a small, but significant change to my prepared remarks. Success stories often focus on singular vision and individual determination, I began. And while those elements certainly played a role in Evergreen's development, the truth is more complex and, I think, more interesting. I scanned the faces around the table, my executive team who had executed the vision with excellence, Diana, whose legal acumen had protected what we built, Megan, whose unwavering friendship had sustained me through challenges, Ichiro, whose international expertise had expanded our horizons, and even James, whose betrayal had inadvertently set the entire journey in motion. Evergreen exists today because of catalysts and collaborators, challenges and champions. Some contributed knowingly, with purpose and dedication. I smiled at Harold's empty chair, which I had insisted on including at the table. Others played roles they never intended or recognized. James met my gaze, understanding the subtle reference. But all are part of the authentic story, not the sanitized version we might present in marketing materials or business school case studies, but the messy human narrative of transformation and growth. The speech continued with specific acknowledgments of individual contributions, culminating in a toast to Evergreen's future, the new initiatives under development, the expanding market presence, the growing impact of our social programs. After the formal program concluded and dessert was served, guests mingled around the room, examining the product displays and sharing memories of Evergreen's evolution. I found myself standing beside the recreation of my original craft fair booth, remembering the woman I had been then, passionate about creating beautiful objects but with no concept of the business I would eventually build. "Penny for your thoughts," Megan said, joining me. "Just reflecting on distance traveled," I replied. "From there to here." She nodded. "So are you going to tell me what the dramatic exit was about earlier?" The staff was buzzing about some woman, causing a scene. I smiled ruefully. Tiffany Reynolds made a surprise appearance. Apparently, she believes she deserves credit and compensation for inspiring Evergreen's creation. Megan's eyes widened. "You're kidding. After all these years? What did she expect? A place at the head table?" "More like a place on the balance sheet," I said. "She wanted half of what she believes I built because of her affair with James." "The audacity," Megan muttered. "As if you would have remained a small-time crafter without their betrayal. She clearly never understood your potential." "Few people did back then," I reminded her, "including me." Megan's expression softened. "I did. From the first time you showed me those handmade candles, I knew you were capable of more than you realized." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "You were ahead of the curve." As the evening drew to a close, guests began departing with final congratulations and expressions of appreciation for the celebration. Diana and her wife lingered to help me gather the personal mementos I had brought for the historical display. "Quite an evening," Diana observed, "even with the unexpected dramatics." "You heard about that?" She smiled. "I'm a lawyer, Sarah. I have highly tuned gossip receptors." I laughed, carefully wrapping the original Evergreen logo sketch Harold had helped me refine. It was surreal, like being confronted by a ghost from another lifetime. "Some people can't move forward," Diana said thoughtfully. "They remain fixated on reimagining the past rather than creating a better future." I almost felt sorry for her, I admitted, to still be so consumed by something that happened years ago, to believe her identity is tied to a relationship that failed. Diana studied me with approval. "That perspective is why you've been able to build what you have, Sarah. You've always focused on creation rather than grievance." We finished packing the display items as the restaurant staff began clearing tables. James approached as Diana and her wife said their goodbyes, offering to help carry the remaining boxes to my car. "That's not necessary," I assured him. "The event team can manage." He nodded, seeming relieved not to have to navigate further awkwardness after the evening's earlier confrontation. "It was a lovely celebration. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." "Thank you for your work." "With the growth initiative," I said sincerely. "The program wouldn't be as successful without your coordination." His smile was genuine. "It's been the most rewarding work of my life, seeing those kids develop skills and confidence." "I know," I agreed. "That's been the most meaningful part of Evergreen's evolution for me as well." We stood for a moment in surprisingly comfortable silence, two people who had wounded each other deeply, now connected by a shared commitment to something larger than themselves. "Well," he said finally, "congratulations again. 10 remarkable years." As he turned to leave, I found myself saying, "James?" He paused, looking back questioningly. "For what it's worth, I think Harold would have been proud of your work with the foster youth, of the person you've become." Surprise, and then something like gratitude crossed his face. "That means a lot. Thank you." After he left, I took one final look around the private dining room, at the empty tables where moments before people had gathered to celebrate Evergreen's decade of growth, at the walls where we had displayed the visual evidence of challenges overcome and milestones achieved. Tiffany's intrusion had been an unexpected reminder of how far I had traveled from that devastating moment of discovery in our kitchen, from the desperate determination that had driven my early business decisions, from the anger that had once fueled my ambition. The empire I had built had indeed begun in the ashes of betrayal, but it had flourished because of something far more powerful than retaliation or vindication. It had grown through vision, through purpose, through connection with others who shared my values and aspirations. Outside, the night air was cool against my skin as I waited for the valet to bring my car. The Portland skyline sparkled across the river, lights reflecting on the dark water like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere in that glittering landscape was Evergreen's headquarters, where tomorrow I would continue the work of leading the company into its second decade, not as the wounded wife seeking independence, but as the confident CEO charting a course toward greater impact and innovation. Tiffany's demand for half of what I had built reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what Evergreen truly was. Not simply a business or even a brand, but a manifestation of my highest values and deepest purpose. Not a reaction to betrayal, but a creation born from the discovery of my own capacity to envision and build something meaningful. The valet arrived with my car, opening the door with a respectful nod. As I drove through the quiet streets toward home, I felt a profound sense of completion, not of Evergreen's journey, which continued to unfold in exciting new directions, but of the personal transformation that had begun that Thanksgiving day when I discovered James's betrayal. The cycle that had begun with devastation and continued through determination, growth, and success had reached a point of true resolution. Not because I had proven anything to those who had underestimated me, but because I had long since moved beyond needing to prove anything at all. The business empire I had built while my husband cheated had become something neither of us could have imagined at the beginning. A force for positive change, a community of like-minded creators, a legacy that would outlast any personal drama or individual achievement. And that, I reflected as I turned into the driveway of the home I had designed and built for myself, was the most profound victory of all. Not over James or Tiffany or anyone who had doubted my potential, but over the limitations I had once accepted for myself before discovering the full measure of my own capabilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chapters in Evergreen's continuing story. I would face them not as someone defined by past wounds, but as a woman who had discovered her power to transform difficulty into possibility, betrayal into beauty, endings into remarkable new beginnings. Morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, illuminating the architectural models arranged on the conference table. The Evergreen Urban Living Initiative, our most ambitious project to date, was taking physical form in these meticulously crafted miniatures. The rooftop gardens incorporate rainwater collection systems, explained Miguel, our lead sustainability architect, pointing to one of the models. Each residential unit will have access to growing space, and we've designed the central courtyard as a community harvest area. I circled the table, examining the models from different angles. 3 mixed-use developments in previously neglected neighborhoods, each combining affordable housing, retail spaces featuring evergreen products, workshops for vocational training, and integrated green spaces. What about the commercial kitchens? I asked. Are they still positioned to be shared resources? Lydia nodded, highlighting that section of the model. Yes, residents can reserve time for personal use, but we've also structured them to accommodate the culinary training program. The Urban Living Initiative represented everything Evergreen had evolved to become over the past 15 years, not just a home goods company, but a holistic force for positive change in the communities we served. The housing developments would provide sustainable living spaces for graduates of our vocational programs, create employment opportunities through the retail spaces, and serve as living laboratories for environmentally conscious urban design. Timeline? I asked, returning to my seat at the head of the table. We break ground on the first site next month, Miguel replied. The other 2 will follow at 3-month intervals. All 3 should be completed within 2 years, assuming no major permitting delays. Diana's already working with city officials to streamline the approval process, I assured him. This initiative aligns perfectly with their affordable housing goals. After reviewing the budget projections and marketing strategy, I dismissed the team with congratulations on their excellent work. As they filed out, Megan remained behind, studying the models with obvious admiration. From candles to community development, she mused. Quite the evolution. I smiled, joining her at the table. Hard to believe sometimes. Not for me, she countered. I always knew you'd do something extraordinary. She glanced at her watch. Speaking of which, we should leave soon if we're going to make it to the ceremony on time. The ceremony. Despite months of preparation, it still didn't feel quite real. Give me 15 minutes to finish a few emails, I requested. Then we can head out. Alone in my office, I found myself drawn not to my computer, but to the window overlooking Portland. The city had changed dramatically since I'd started Evergreen, as had I. The angry, wounded woman determined to prove her worth had given way to someone more contemplative, more focused on legacy than vindication. The Governor's Award for Business Innovation and Social Impact was a recognition not just of Evergreen's commercial success, but of our broader contributions to Oregon's economic and social landscape. The Growth Initiative alone had created transitional employment for over 500 foster youth, with 70% moving on to permanent positions either within Evergreen or with partner organizations. My phone chimed with a text from Ichiro in Tokyo. Congratulations on today's honor. Well deserved. Recognition for vision beyond profit. Virtual toast from across the Pacific. I smiled, typing a quick response before gathering my things for the ceremony. Ichiro had become not just a business partner, but a valued friend and advisor, his perspective helping to shape Evergreen's international presence with cultural sensitivity and authentic connection to each market we entered. Megan was waiting by the elevator, elegant in a forest green dress we'd designed as part of Evergreen's sustainable fashion line, a recent expansion that had surprised even our most optimistic market analysts with its immediate success. Ready? For your moment in the spotlight? She asked as we descended to the lobby. Hardly my moment, I corrected. This is recognition for the entire Evergreen community. She rolled her eyes fondly. Always deflecting credit. Some things never change. The ceremony was being held at the state capitol, an hour's drive that gave me time to review my acceptance speech. I had deliberately kept it brief, focusing on the collaborative nature of Evergreen's achievements rather than my personal journey. As we approached Salem, Megan glanced at me. Have you heard from James? Will he be there today? The question didn't surprise me. As coordinator of the Growth Initiative's educational components, James had been instrumental in developing the apprenticeship programs the governor specifically mentioned in the award citation. He's presenting at a conference in Seattle, I replied. Sent his congratulations yesterday. Our professional relationship had remained cordial over the years, evolving into something resembling mutual respect. We would never be friends in the conventional sense, but we had found a way to work together effectively on initiatives that mattered to both of us. The Capitol building gleamed in the afternoon sun, its distinctive gold pioneer statue visible from blocks away. As we pulled into the reserved parking area, I noticed reporters gathering near the entrance, cameras ready to capture arrivals for the ceremony. Looks like quite the media turnout, Megan observed. I nodded, mentally preparing for the interviews that would inevitably follow the award presentation. Public recognition had become an increasingly common aspect of my role as Evergreen expanded, though I still preferred focusing on the work itself rather than the accolades it generated. Inside, the ceremony space was already filling with state officials, business leaders, and representatives from the social impact organizations being recognized alongside Evergreen. I greeted several familiar faces, including Elena Martinez from Portland Youth Transitions, whose early partnership with our Growth Initiative had helped establish its credibility. This is quite the honor, Elena commented, gesturing toward the stage where the awards would be presented. Though hardly surprising given what Evergreen has accomplished. Your organization deserves equal credit, I replied sincerely. We couldn't have developed the vocational programs without your expertise. As we continued our conversation, I noticed a familiar figure entering the hall. Not James, as Megan had wondered, but Tiffany Reynolds. Her appearance was so unexpected that I momentarily lost track of what Elena was saying. Unlike her disruptive entrance at the anniversary dinner 2 years earlier, Tiffany's presence today seemed subdued, almost hesitant. She was dressed professionally, carrying what appeared to be a portfolio case, and scanning the room with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Sarah?" Elena prompted, bringing my attention back to our conversation. "I'm sorry," I apologized. "Someone unexpected just arrived. Would you excuse me for a moment?" I made my way through the growing crowd toward where Tiffany stood near the entrance. She spotted me approaching and straightened, lifting her chin slightly as though preparing for confrontation. "Tiffany," I said when I reached her. "This is a surprise." "I imagine it is," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "I'm here representing Green Futures magazine. They assigned me to cover the ceremony." I hadn't known she had moved into journalism. "I see. Congratulations on the position." She nodded, a flicker of something like pride crossing her face. "It's recent. Environmental business journalism. I've been freelancing for a couple of years, but this is my first staff writer role." The awkwardness between us was palpable, the weight of our history creating a tension that made even simple conversation feel strained. "Your urban living initiative is part of why you're being recognized today," she continued, professional demeanor asserting itself. "Would you be willing to answer a few questions about it after the ceremony? For the article?" The request was reasonable, expected even from a journalist covering the event. Yet coming from Tiffany, it carried layers of complexity neither of us could fully ignore. "Of course," I agreed. "My communications director can arrange a few minutes." She glanced down at her portfolio case. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you directly. There's something I wanted to—" She stopped, seeming to reconsider. "It can wait until after the ceremony." Before I could respond, the event coordinator approached, informing me that honorees were being gathered for the procession. With a brief nod to Tiffany, I followed the coordinator to where Megan waited with the other Evergreen representatives, who would join me on stage. The ceremony proceeded with the formal rhythm of official state functions, speeches from the governor and various dignitaries, presentations of awards in different categories, polite applause punctuating each segment. Evergreen's award was the final recognition of the afternoon, described by the governor as emblematic of Oregon's commitment to business innovation that serves the greater good. As I accepted the Crystal Award inscribed with Evergreen's name, I looked out at the audience and caught sight of Tiffany in the press section, her expression thoughtful as she made notes on her tablet. Whatever animosity had fueled her interruption of our anniversary dinner seemed absent today, replaced by something more contemplative. My acceptance speech emphasized the collaborative nature of Evergreen's achievements, acknowledging the partners, employees, and community members who had contributed to our success. I spoke briefly about our vision for the Urban Living Initiative and its potential to create self-sustaining communities where residents could live, work, and grow together. Fundamentally, I concluded, Evergreen believes that business can and should be a force for positive transformation, not just of markets, but of lives and communities. This award honors that belief and recommits us to the work of bringing it more fully into reality. Thank you. The applause was gratifying, but what moved me more deeply was the sight of our team members in the audience, especially those who had come through the growth initiative and now held key positions within the company. Their presence embodied the real impact of what we had built together. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, Tiffany approached with her press credentials visible. "That was a thoughtful speech," she said, less self-congratulatory than most award acceptances. "Thank you," I replied, unsure where this conversation was heading. She hesitated, then reached into her portfolio case and withdrew a manila envelope. Before I ask my official questions, there's something I wanted to give you. Something I should have given you years ago. Curious, I accepted the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and what appeared to be manuscript pages. "I've been working on a book," Tiffany explained, her composure faltering slightly. "About women in business, specifically those who overcame significant personal challenges to build successful companies." She gestured to the pages. "Your story is the centerpiece of the final chapter." I glanced at the manuscript, noting with surprise that it was titled, "Rising, Women Who Built from Broken Foundations." "The letter explains more fully," she continued. "But I wanted you to see how I've characterized your journey before I submit the final draft. It's not how I spoke about it at your anniversary dinner." The frankness of her acknowledgement was unexpected. "What changed?" I asked. Tiffany's gaze shifted to the award I still held. "Professional therapy, for one thing. And time, perspective." She shrugged slightly. "Writing the book forced me to examine my own narrative more honestly, to recognize how I'd distorted certain realities to protect my ego." I wasn't sure how to respond to this version of Tiffany, reflective, apparently sincere in her reassessment. "The truth is," she continued when I remained silent, "watching what you built with Evergreen made me confront my own choices. Not just the affair with James, but the shortcuts I tried to take afterward with Woodland. The blame I placed everywhere but on myself when it failed." "That couldn't have been easy," I acknowledged. "It wasn't," she agreed with a rueful smile. "But it was necessary. I couldn't move forward until I stopped telling myself convenient fictions about the past." A photographer approached, asking to take pictures of me with the award. Tiffany stepped back, professional demeanor returning. "I should let you celebrate," she said. "But I would still appreciate those few minutes for my article, if you're willing." "I'll find you before I leave," I promised. As the reception continued, I found a quiet corner to scan the manuscript pages Tiffany had given me. The chapter chronicling Evergreen's development was surprisingly accurate and insightful, portraying my journey without the distortions I might have expected. More surprisingly, Tiffany had portrayed her own role with unflinching honesty, acknowledging her part in the affair and her subsequent attempts to capitalize on my business model without doing the necessary foundational work. The letter accompanying the manuscript explained that writing the book had been part of her own healing process, a way to reframe her understanding of success and failure, to move beyond the narrative of victimhood she had constructed to protect herself from uncomfortable truths. By the time I found Tiffany again for the promised interview, I had gained a new perspective on our complicated history. The questions she asked about the Urban Living Initiative were thoughtful and well-researched, focused on the social impact aspects rather than just the business metrics. As we concluded, she closed her tablet and looked at me directly. "For whatever it's worth, I admire what you've built, Sarah. Not just the company, but the person you've become while building it." The sentiment was delivered without the performative drama that had characterized our last encounter. Just a simple statement of truth from someone who had finally found her own path forward. "Thank you for the manuscript pages," I said. "Your book sounds important, necessary even." She nodded, a tentative smile forming. "It's been therapeutic to write, to examine how women rebuild after various forms of devastation, whether personal betrayal, professional setbacks, or systemic barriers." "When will it be published?" "Early next year, if all goes according to schedule." She hesitated. Would you be willing to provide a quote for the cover? After you've read the full manuscript, of course." The request represented a remarkable evolution in our relationship, from adversaries to something approaching mutual professional respect. "Send me the complete draft," I agreed. "I'd be happy to consider it." As Tiffany departed and I rejoined the Evergreen team for photographs with the governor, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected symmetry of the day. An award recognizing how far Evergreen had come, coupled with an interaction that illustrated how far I had come personally in moving beyond the wounds that had once defined me. Later that evening, as we drove back to Portland with the Crystal Award securely boxed on the back seat, Megan asked about my conversation with Tiffany. It was healing, I said after a moment's consideration. For both of us, I think. I never thought I'd see the day, Megan remarked, though I suppose 15 years is long enough for even the most difficult relationships to evolve. 15 years. The span seemed simultaneously enormous and fleeting, a significant portion of a lifetime, but merely the beginning of what Evergreen could become. As we crossed the Willamette River into Portland, the city lights reflected in the water, like stars in a dark mirror. Somewhere in that glittering landscape were the construction sites where our urban living initiative would soon take physical form, transforming not just vacant lots, but entire community ecosystems. The empire I had built from the ashes of betrayal had become something neither James nor I could have imagined at the beginning, a force for regeneration rather than merely a business success story. The wounds that had initially fueled my determination had long since healed, leaving behind not scars, but strength, not bitterness, but vision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to extend Evergreen's impact. I would face them, not as someone defined by past injuries, but as a woman who had discovered her capacity to transform difficulty into possibility, endings into extraordinary new beginnings. The journey had come full circle, from devastation to creation to a recognition that transcended personal vindication. The true value of what we had built lay not in proving anything to those who had underestimated me, but in creating something that made the world better than I had found it. And that, I reflected as Portland's skyline welcomed us home, was the most meaningful victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.